These officials failed to appear, it, quote, shall constitute evidence of obstruction of the House's impeachment inquiry. Joining me now is MSNBC legal contributor and trial lawyer, also that's Katie Fong, and also former federal prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst Glenn Kirshner. All right, Katie, let's start off with you with 4 of the 5 state officials called to appear that are mentioned in this complaint. So legally, do they have to testify? And if they fail to cooperate, what happens?
So they should testify. Nobody should be defiant and not actually comply with an order from Congress to sit for a deposition, especially one of this import. But we've seen, Francis, that there's nothing that has stopped this administration from preventing people to give the transparency that everybody deserves to get. And so because of that, could they theoretically refuse? Sure, they could. But, you know, the reality is I don't think that's going to happen, especially if you look at the current party line that's coming out of this administration, Francis. The Trump administration is claiming that there's nothing wrong. There was no quid pro quo. Why would we turn over the actual contents of that call with President Zelensky of the Ukraine if there was nothing to hide? And so at this point in time, I think you're going to see the employees. Now, remember, we're going to say the current employees, because as it was mentioned, Kurt Volker no longer works for this administration. He resigned on Friday night. So we'll have at least 4 State Department employees show up this week. During the course of those depositions, Francis, I would actually want to focus on the involvement specifically of Rudy Giuliani and Bill Barr. I would, of course, ask questions about Donald Trump. There could be an issue vis-a-vis some type of invocation of privilege, executive privilege. But I would really want to know and try to get as much information as possible about Rudy Giuliani and Bill Barr, because I'd like to see if we can make both of them so uncomfortable that they actually end up trying to flip against Donald Trump or against each other more so than they already have.
Wow, and we've already heard from Barr with reporting that he's very upset and angry, trying to distance himself from this whole thing, because you've got Rudy Giuliani there, who has been very vocal about this. In fact, in an interview, he just read his personal text messages. It's been argued that he's trying to further implicate the State Department here and hoping to draw attention away from himself. So, Glenn, how serious of a problem is this for the State Department?
You know, I think it could be a real problem for the State Department, because the summary, not transcript of the call, but the summary of the call that we now have seen shows that the president is engaged in improperly trying to extract something from the president of Ukraine and holding congressionally allocated funds hostage in order to do that. So for the State Department to have been involved in any way in furthering that effort is a real problem. And I'll tell you, the people that I want to see testify, Francis, are the people that I.G. Atkinson refers to in the second sentence of his report, because what he says in that report is, I have received information from multiple U.S. government officials that President Trump is using his office to solicit interference from a foreign country in the 2020 elections. Michael Atkinson has told us he's talked with multiple U.S. officials who said President Trump is doing wrong. We need to see those people. This is not just one whistleblower. This is a lot of people inside government who have reported, not publicly yet, but reported the wrongdoing they have seen. We now need to see that.
All right, let's talk about the depositions that are set in the coming week. We have that calendar of those officials who are expected to speak and testify on that, too. So, Katie, what are the questions you would ask them? And even for those who wouldn't testify or who are not going to just yet?
So, Francis, congressional rules entitle these deponents or these employees to have personal counsel present during the course of these depositions. And if I were making these questions, I would actually begin with the who, what, where, why, and how. I mean, those are really important questions to have answered. I also would not just limit it to the Ukraine context. I would actually ask questions about the allegations that calls with the Saudi family, calls with President Putin are now being stored in an exclusive sensitive, lockdown server. I'd want to know the information behind that, because that leads you to more evidence, either direct or circumstantial evidence, of obstruction of justice. If this administration, including Trump, is trying to block access or trying to hide the fact that he's actually doing something illegally, then I think that would be a really great entree into being able to explore that perhaps it's not just the Ukraine and this call with Zelensky,
right,
or the myriad of calls and the contact between Giuliani, et cetera, that it's actually other countries that are implicated in this, including President Putin.
But that's given the fact if they would be forthcoming with that information, Glenn. The reality is, hey, we may not ever see that, or there may not be that cooperation after all.
Yeah, but I'm with Katie here. We now have learned that there are lots of calls, and the summaries of these calls have been placed in a database or a server that was not designed to hold these kind of calls. Let's face it. The Trump administration was trying to hide these calls, bury these calls. Doesn't it feel a lot like when Congress was, or when special counsel was subpoenaing Richard Nixon's tapes? Congress needs to subpoena these calls, and let's see if the administration ponies up or obstructs up, because now we need to see what was being said to other world leaders that might have been improper.
Yeah, because we've heard that the defense there is that it was standard. It's just standard to put them in that locked away secret server, just to keep them out of peering eyes. Glenn, I want to talk about Rudy Giuliani once again, who defended his client's comments asking the Ukrainian president to do him a favor. Let's hear more from Rudy.
Don't leaders of foreign countries have the right to call each other up and ask each other for a favor?
In the case of evidence of serious criminal conduct, they have the obligation to do it. In fact, if the president hadn't done it, he would have violated Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution to take care that the laws are faithfully executed.
All right. How do you interpret that, Glenn?
Yeah, I've never heard an argument before that if the president hadn't committed this crime, he would have committed a crime. Think about how ridiculous that reasoning is. Let me tell you this, Francis. If Rudy Giuliani has any sort of lingering law-abidingness or legal reasoning left in his head, when he hits the congressional witness stand, he sure better invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, which I predict any lawyer he retains will advise him to do, because he is in hot water.
And we heard you say, note, when he appears. All right, Glenn Kirshner and Katie Fang, always insightful. Thank you.